or this idea that we have in the Bible, giants upon the earth. At one time, there are stories in the Bible that man lived among his living gods, and in the English version, this gets translated. The story is to, there was once a time after the Great Flood, there were giants upon the earth, before the flood as well. So interestingly enough, here we have a Sumerian tablet that's basically 2500 BC, 4,500 years old, and it's showing a Sumerian Anunnaki seated, and you see the Sumerian men coming up and greeting him, and they're rising up, a symbolic reference of the sun. And very interesting, as depicted, the Sumerian king, or the Anunnaki, if you will, is much larger than the average workers. So here's another interesting image where, just like we have in the Bible, the English version that Adam and Eve were tempted to not eat the fruit from the tree of life. Well, here's a Sumerian description from 4,000 years ago that shows two Anunnaki standing beside what was known as the tree of life, and a symbolic reference of some type of winged craft, because as you can see, there's a gentleman flying this craft. Now, is this just mythology? Are they just saying that they saw something in the sky and they were trying to describe what it was? I think when we look at this information with a new perspective, in the fact that if these were, stone-wielding, living in a clay hut, primitive civilization, and they saw, let's say, beings coming down from the heaven or strange craft in the sky, they wouldn't know what to call them. They would call them gods. Not today. We have technology, and especially with the people in this room, we have a little bit broader understanding for what could have been taking place back then and is still happening today. So here's another description of Sumerian Anunnaki, and I believe this is actually an Assyrian wall drawing, but all of the information, again, from these cultures was all picked up from the Sumerian culture originally, meaning the Sumerians were the first ones to have these depictions and all of the translations describing what took place when they had interactions with these beings. Another thing to note is that you'll see that the Anunnaki is holding the fruit of life and the water of life. Just like Adam was told not to eat the apple or the fruit of life, this symbology is all represented in the original Sumerian form, recorded in stone, unchanged. Here's another version of an Anunnaki, a little bit clearer. Again, you can see the very genetically sound physique, I guess, if you will, and the idea that they are, again, using symbology to show that things were taking place back then that the Sumerians were being told, don't do this, follow these laws, don't follow these. And all of this information has been translated into various versions that we have now in Hebrew and English. Another just description of the Anunnaki holding a deer, and this elaborate inscription, if we could see it, would clearly explain what is happening. But the Sumerians, again, were very articulate in explaining their daily lives and events. And when British scholars in the early 1900s started excavating artifacts from Iraq, they find things with Anunnaki, these winged beings, or actually descriptions of the planets, which we discussed a moment ago, of Venus and stuff. They didn't quite understand what the Sumerians were discussing. And so all of this information went into a big pile called the myth pile and was untouched by modern archaeology. So again, this name that I mentioned, Zachariah Sitchin or Eric von Daniken, Chariots of the Gods, you might have been familiar with that. These are, there's only a handful of scholars who have chosen to look at this information outside of the mainstream understanding of archaeology and start to question, did these events really take place, or is this just some mythology that this culture is making up? I say it's something that actually took place. So when we look at some of the modern symbology used, for instance, with the Apollo 11 astronauts, it starts to give us a little bit of a clearer picture for what the Sumerians might have been using, saying the Anunnaki had wings. Obviously, they probably weren't birdmen, as many of the archaeologists like to classify them. Here's the same symbology being used by our Apollo space program. Obviously, we weren't landing birds on the moon. We were using symbolic representation that we had the power of flight, just like the Sumerians were showing with the Anunnaki. So here's a little interesting video clip that shows the first launch of Apollo 11 when we went to the moon. And if you'll remember that the first words uttered by Neil Armstrong when they got there was, Houston, the Eagle has landed. So, this symbology being used to denote the power of flight doesn't seem so far-fetched when we look at it in the terms of just using a symbolic reference of someone having the power of flight. So the ancient symbology, again, of the Anunnaki compared to what we know of, today and the idea of extraterrestrials, it starts to make a little bit more sense as to what they were saying when we look at these descriptions in a new light. Another amazing revelation with the Sumerian information is the idea that something happened to cause a great flood, and there was a story in English that we know of Noah's Ark. Well, interestingly enough, held in the British Museum, and I will point out also, since a lot of people who might be aware of this information, it's not just Zachariah Sitchin or Eric von Daniken, a couple of, let's just say, UFO more slanted researchers saying that, oh, this is all information that was held in the Bible. No, these are actual stories, and these translations, if you could read them, are all provided by other scholars in mainstream archaeology, most of them from the British Museum. Samuel Kramer, M.E.L. Malone, and this translation of this artifact is called the Flood Tablet. It's on display in the British Museum as the Flood Tablet, and it clearly describes a story of how an Anunnaki chose to choose a certain Sumerian and bequeath him knowledge that this event was going to take place, and to build a huge craft, a ship, and to save the life of all the animals on the planet, if you will. Now, Zachariah Sitchin has theorized that, we see in the English version, like 2 by 2, the animals, but it's very possible that just like the Sumerians had this knowledge that the Anunnaki were their gods, it's very possible that the Anunnaki, if you will, these beings that bequeathed the Sumerians all this knowledge, could have somehow made, the DNA sequencing or the test tube babies of many of these creatures and then store it in a way so that you have the genetic code of these creatures to then reinstate after a calamitous event such as a great flood. Just an interesting side note, but here we have on display the actual flood tablet from the Sumerian culture, the original version of the flood story. So it starts to raise a question, and when we look into the idea of, angels in the Bible and the Nephilim in Hebrew, where is heaven exactly? I mean, in English it just says heaven. They come from heaven. Where is heaven? That really was a question that I wanted to have answered, being raised as a Christian. So interestingly enough, we have a Sumerian a Sumerian tablet. This one is 4,500 years old, and it's showing the Anunnaki god bequeathing man the plow, the modern age of agriculture. But very interestingly, as a backdrop to this seal, a 4,500-year-old seal in stone, we see our complete solar system with the sun in the center. And we did not know that the sun was in the center of our universe. We thought Earth was the center. All the way up through Galileo and Copernicus, not until the advances of modern science did we realize, wow, we actually orbit the sun. The Sumerians describing that perfectly, accurately, 4,500 years ago. And just to give you an idea of what the Sumerians knew as far as it comes to our solar system, they depicted a solar system with 12 members, not just 9. They counted the 9 planets that we know of, plus the sun, our moon, and then an additional planet called Nibiru, which meant planet of the crossing. And now this planet and the stories behind it are very interesting because the Sumerians very clearly described that these beings, the Anunnaki, their living gods, came from this planet called Nibiru. And again, let's keep that number in our head, 12, because the Sumerian knowledge of 12 planets in our solar system, you'll see some more of that symbology, how it's been filtered down today. Interestingly enough, if you're hip and cool, we think that we live on the third rock from the sun, but it's actually, if someone were coming into our solar system, coming from Pluto in, you would start over here where Pluto is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and Earth would be the 7th planet. The Sumerians called Earth Ki, the 7th planet. And why did they call Earth the 7th planet? Because the Anunnaki, when they came and visited us, said, you're on the 7th planet. And this whole idea or the notion, just some quick symbology, the 7th planet, well, the 7 days in a week, the 7 days of creation, the 7 days of creation, the Sumerians had 7 tablets of creation, which I'll show you one of them in a moment. But this story hollowed out in the English version of the Epic of Creation, 7 days of creation. The Sumerians have a counterpart, the original version, 7 tablets of creation. So there we go, the sacred number 7. So here's another tablet which Zachariah Sitchin likes to use frequently in many of his lectures. This is a tablet which, as translated by Zachariah Sitchin, shows the path that the Anunnaki took from Nibiru, bless you, to Earth. And so here, as I've circled, is the section that Zachariah Sitchin decided to translate.